Welcome to another in our series of Kehillat Israel podcasts. This is a recording of Rabbi Amy Bernstein's weekly Friday morning Torah study.
We are beginning the Parsha Beha'alotecha. I want this week to, sometimes I'm in a very one sentence, 3-word oriented rabbit hole. I'm actually this week struck by something that was more like a 30,000 foot view of the book and where we are in the book. So we're going to start down a rabbit hole and then we're going to burst out of it. I'm hoping that this makes sense to anyone outside of my own head. No promises. But I'm reading a lot. I'll just tee it up by saying I'm reading a lot of articles these days because I'm reading a lot on the Free Press. I'm reading The Marginalian, which used to be Brain Pickings. Reading a lot of articles these days that are trying to address what is this huge thing that we saw erupt after October 7th. So on all of these college campuses, in all of these different ways, and it's not just, and I don't mean just, but it's not just anti-Semitism that's always been there and that's rearing its ugly head. It's not. And a lot of us know that. I'm not saying that's not true and that's not there. There's something else happening on the left that is a politics of grievance, that is an anger, that is mistrustful of institutions. We have it happening on the right, for sure. But that seems pretty clear, what's going on the right. They want to undermine, the judicial system. They want to undermine, the checks and balances on powers, which we have in place to support our democracy. We kind of get that from the right and their totalitarian, longings and populist leanings right now. It's disturbing, distressing, disorienting, deeply troubling for a lot of us what's happening on the left, because it feels like coalitions have come apart and there are betrayals of loyalties to values and causes that align with those values. There are clashes happening and there's an eruption of, this is my language based on Yehuda Kurtzer from Hartman last summer. There's an eruption of illiberalism and a new orthodoxy on the left, that if you're not in line with what the party line is, you are canceled. You are out. You are racist. You are homophobic. You are fill in the blank. And it's deeply distressing and disorienting for those of us who have found ourselves on the left most of our lives. And we've even been called far left, even just because of who we were, right? Just if you're queer, you're obviously far left.
And if you're Jewish.
And if you're for some Jews, not all Jews, some Jews are Republicans, right? But, and conservative people. But right, there were a lot of charges. So this has been going on for me for a while and trying to unpack what is causing some of this. I'm seeing it in a lot of places. Now, it may just be confirmation bias that whenever you start being interested in something, you see all these articles about it. But I also do feel like people are really wrestling with what's happening right now with our young people, right, who are not educated about so much, but are so active. And I'm not saying that's not happened before. I'm not suggesting that. Someone challenged me the other day, a young person, and I was like, I love this I love this young person. So I took a breath, like my coach tells me, and sat back. I said, I'm not saying it's not happened before. I do believe the stakes are different this time. And I believe social media has exacerbated the very things that are causing some of this, which include mis and disinformation. That is something we've not seen before. We've seen a skewing of the facts that we got from Walter Cronkite. We've seen skewings of that to one side or the other, but we all agreed on the facts. Then you could interpret them and have deep, serious arguments and protests in the streets about how you interpret those facts and what you do with them and what they mean. We didn't ever disagree before about what reality is. So a lot of folks are like, well, how did we get here? What's happening? This can't just be an accident. It's not just that there's social media. That can't be so the stakes are different. I'm deeply concerned about this, I've said this from the pulpit for several years. I'm deeply concerned about our democracy, but it's gotten worse over the last few years. My concerns about the health of our democracy. And democracies other places in the world right now, who we're seeing elected in other countries in this world right now, is a signaling that we have every reason to be very concerned about Western democracy as we've known it, assuming, in my naive young years, assuming it would flourish and of course take over. And what we're seeing is not that. And we're actually seeing the growth of places like China and Iran and their influences. And so anyway, so I'm starting to try to, because that's how I take comfort in the world when things scare me, is I try to read everything I can and try to analyze it and break it down and like diagnose it. And because at least if we know what's happening and what's causing it, there's at least some hope at how we orient ourselves towards a solution or towards addressing it. So
ignorance is the real enemy.
100%. And so I'm in that phase of really trying to read everything I can. So that is a long introduction to how I want to look at where we are in the book of Numbers, because some folks that I will show you obviously on the source sheet have written an article, and actually it's from this book that's not so new, but it seems to align with exactly what I'm reading everywhere. And again, it's probably my rabbinic confirmation bias. This is 2014. So this is 10 years ago already. It's Torah Me'et Zion, which is a publication out of Yeshivat Har Etzion in Israel. And so Torah Me'et Zion, get it? Torah from Etzion, not Zion. Okay, whatever. So, all right. So let's jump in. But for Betsy, I hope you'll be excited about at least where we're going to begin when we start. Right. Okay. So I want to give you an overview of what we're looking at so we're not going to go too deep into text. We're going to go deep into one little text, but I want to give you some big textual context so you can understand where this author is coming from when we go to analyzing what's important about where we are this morning. All right. So I want to begin at Numbers chapter 9, verse 15. But we want to get all the way to 11. So, be ready to start flipping pages. Okay?
Thank you.
Chapter 9, verse 15. We've been getting a description up till now. Remember, the book of Numbers starts with a census. Then we have the marching order, literally, of all the tribes. Banners, 3 tribes per banner, 4 sides around the Mishkan, how they're going to camp, where they're going to camp, what order they're going to march in, right? We get the structure, we get, how the Mishkan, we get the erection we get all this stuff, right? From Exodus and now to Numbers, all of the organization of this people that is on the march to take the promised land. They are days away from the promised land. The census is because they're going to have to fight. That's why you take a census. You have to know how many people are fighting. This is the organization of the people as they march, and they're going to have to fight. So it's the structure, blah, 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 because they're about to march to take the promised land. This is all of this stuff. Since we came through the sea, we get Sinai, we leave Sinai, and we become the people, the organization of the people that is ready to move and start a new reality in a new land, a new old land, Tel Aviv, right? The new old land. Okay. So that's the mood, says the author of this article. That's the mood that we have leaving Sinai, getting all of the organization, getting all of the descriptions of that, getting all of the positions, what tribe does what, which Levites take apart the Mishkan, which cover the things, which carry the things, when that all of the sacrifices, all the stuff we've been studying about. This is how this thing is structured, and it's all working. It's all working. Okay. So that's where we're at. That's this moment at Numbers. And we see at 15, on the day that the tabernacle was set up, so now we've had all the instructions for the Mishkan, which goes into great detail. Then we have And they did it, and they did this, and they did this, and they did this, and they did it. And they repeat all of it again. They did the purple, and they did the crimson, and they did the gold sockets. We get all of that again. And now we get the day the Mishkan is set up, and the cloud covered the tabernacle, the tent of the pact, and in the evening it rested over the tabernacle in the likeness of fire until morning. And it was always so. The cloud covered it, appearing as fire by night. And whenever the cloud lifted from the tent, the Israelites would set out accordingly. And at the spot where the cloud settled, there the Israelites would make camp. At a command of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, the Israelites broke camp. And at a command of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, they made camp. They remained encamped as long as the cloud stayed over the tabernacle. When the cloud lingered over the Mishkan many days, the Israelites observed God's mandate and did not journey on. At such times as the cloud rested on the Mishkan, but for a few days, they remained encamped at a command of God and broke camp at the command of God. At such times as the cloud stayed from evening till morning, they broke camp as soon as the cloud lifted in the morning. Everything's going fine. The cloud tells them when to go, when to stay, whether it's a month or a year, however long the cloud lingered, the Israelites remained and did not set out, right? When it lifted, they broke camp. On a sign from God, they made camp, and on a sign from God, they broke camp. They observed God's mandate at God's bidding through Moshe. Moshe is talking now about trumpets. So when it's time for the people to move, here's what you're going to do. Long blast followed by short blasts. The division encamped on the east moves forward. Then you sound it a second time, and those encamped on the south move forward, right? So we're getting more instructions about how they're to move and all this great stuff. In the second year, on the 20th day of the second month. So we are in the beginning of the second year since the Exodus, right? The cloud lifted from the Mishkan, and the Israelites set out on their journeys from the wilderness of Sinai. The cloud came to rest in the wilderness of Paran. When the march was to begin at God's command through Moses, the first standard to set out troop by troop was the division of Judah. And now we get the name of each tribal troop. Then the tabernacle would be taken apart, the Gershonites and the Merarites who carried the tabernacle, right? Blah, 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 blah. Here we go. And it's all set out. It's all clear. Verse 23, verse 24, verse 25, all of the accountings of the tribes, right? As they set out. So now we're at 29, right? So Moshe goes to his father-in-law, which here is called Chovav ben Reuel, the Midianite. He's called something else elsewhere. Right? What's his father-in-law called elsewhere? Yitro. All right. So Chovav ben Reuel, the Midianite, Moshe's father-in-law. And what does Moshe say to him? It's this interesting conversation. We're not going to go into it today a lot, but I read some interesting stuff about like what exactly is happening here. So what does Moshe say to him? We're setting out for the place for which Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh has said, I will give it to you. Come with us, and we will be generous with you. For Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh has promised to be generous to Israel. Now, generous is not the word used in the Hebrew. What's the word in the Hebrew? Ki Adonai diber tov al Yisrael. Will be good to Israel, right? Behevtanu lach. We will be good to you. So this word good appears over and over and over in this talk by Moshe to his father-in-law. Bayomer elav, lo elech. And he says to him, I will not go, but will return to my native land. He said, meaning Moshe, please do not leave us, insomuch as you know where we should camp in the wilderness and can be our guide. So if you come with us, right, we will extend to you the same bounty that God grants us. We will good to you what God goods to us, and the good to us will give to you, right? So good is repeated 5 times. Whenever that happens in Torah, it is a red flag. This is a stylistic you know this because we studied together a lot. It's one of the ways Torah indicates something about what's happening beyond just the words of what's happening. By repeating a word, remember sometimes it's to see, but in this case, it's tov. Everything's good. God has been good to us. We'll be good to you. We'll share our good with you. We're going to a good place, to a good land, to build a good society. Everything's good. Right. They mark, and we will share our good with the good of the good that God has goodified us with. All right. So they marched from the mountain, and we don't hear anything here, but that's it, right? He said his piece very well, and we don't hear anything else. They marched from the mountain of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh a distance of 3 days. the Ark of the Covenant traveled in front of them on that 3 days journey to seek out a resting place for them. So this is the detail we're going to pick up in a little bit. So remember this, right? They march. The Ark of the Covenant goes ahead by 3 days to kind of, I guess, scope out, right? What's going on? Where is the presence of God usually understood to be? With the Ark. So the Midrash is going to talk about Shekhinah. The Shekhinah is with the Ark, and it's 3 days ahead of Bnei Israel, of the people of Israel. Okay? So that's just keep that in your head. And God's cloud kept above them by day as they moved from camp. Okay. Look at verse 35. Look in your printed editions. And what do you see at the Hebrew? You don't have to know Hebrew to see that there's something different here. Look at the scribal tradition. And what do you see? It looks like what?
Yeah.
It looks like an upside down nun. Okay. This is a scribal tradition that at the beginning of Vayihi bin Soah Haaron comes an inverted nun. Okay. This is where we're going to dig. All right. Where do we know these words from? Vayihi bin Soah Haaron vayomer Moshe kuma Adonai ve'afutzu oivecha ve'yanusu misanecha mipanecha. Guess where it stops though. All right. Because the rabbis weave liturgy together, right? So this is the opening of the Torah service. And what are we seeing when we come to the Ark at the beginning of the Torah service? When the Ark would set out, right? Vayihi bin Soah Haaron, vayomer Moshe. Then Moshe would say, Huma Adonai, get up Adonai, ve'yafutzu oivecha, and scatter your enemies. Ve'yanusu misanecha mipanecha, and may those who hate you flee from before your face. This is what we chant at the Ark for the beginning of the Torah service. I once gave a whole high holiday sermon on this in Duluth, because I was like, I used to hate those words. And then I was like, wait a minute, do I really hate those words? Right? Is it a terrible thing to ask for those who hate what we stand for when we talk about our values? Do we hate the idea of the haters fleeing? Not so much. Doesn't say when something bad happened to them. Let them go, right? Go. Gesund to hate. Live in, but be far away from me, right? So, yes?
Biblical Hebrew would modern day Hebrew speaking people understand those words that have been chanted in the Torah service?
They'd understand enough. Yeah. Oyev is the same, enemy. Sonecha, those who hate you. Sin'ah is the same word in Hebrew. Mipanecha, from before you. Kuma, get up. So they'd understand enough. All right. So thank you. So that's where the inverted nun begins, right? And so far, so good, right? That everything's going according to plan. Everything is beautiful. The Ark, and then when it would set out, and Moshe would say, get up and scatter your enemies before you. May those who hate you flee. Beautiful. And when it halted, when it stopped, he would say, Shuva Adonai, return, O God, you who are Israel's myriads of thousands. Beautiful. And what do we have at the end of that statement? At the end of 36? What do we have? An upside down nun. Clearly, there is a scribal tradition that preserves something about this chunk of Torah. There are midrashim, and we're going to look at one of them, that call this an entire book of Torah. So what does that mean? Number one. But number two, some people want to say this used to be a book, and this is all we have left. That there was some big thing here that we have lost, and this is all we have left. But the reality that it used to be its own thing is preserved by the inverted nuns. These inverted nuns are in every single Torah scroll you will encounter.
Only in this place.
Yes, this is sectioned off. Right. Yes. So this is in every Torah scroll you'll find because it's a preserved scribal tradition. So often the question is, when did it start? How early do we have indications of it, Betsy? Do they all look the same? Are they all written the same way? And are they all placed in exactly the same place? Okay. The answer to those last two questions is no. They do not all look the same, and they are not placed in the same place. I found a very interesting piece that said that second nun There is a tradition that it's not placed here at the end of 36. Instead, it is placed in verse 1 of chapter 11, which comes now, right after our inverted nun sequence, comes this next part. Vayehi ha'am ki mitonenim ra be'oznei Adonai. The people became like complainers, complaining before God. God heard it and was teed off. A fire of Yud-Heh Vav-Heh broke out against them, ravaging the kitzei hamachaneh, at the edges of the camp. Okay, we're not told what they're complaining about. They become like complainers. Do you see verse 1 of chapter 11? Yes. Okay, that word kimit onanim, that third word in Hebrew. Again, you don't have to read Hebrew. Just count to the third word in the first verse. What do you see in that word? 2 nuns. There is a scribal tradition where that second nun is placed between these nuns. I know, right? I know, blew my mind too. I'm loving this. Is such a geek out group that they're excited about this. We can geek out together. There's a scribal, there is a tradition in an old text that shows, in one of the first editions of Mikraot Gedolot, that in between those 2 nuns in the 1500s, that upside down nun is placed here. We're going to talk a little bit about why. First of all, it's sacrilege, according to some commentators, because you're actually monkeying and messing then with the actual Torah text, God forbid, which comes from Sinai, which comes from God. You can't do that. That's heresy. But I'm more curious about why would there be a tradition to put the nun here? If the tradition everywhere else is to put it where it makes sense with the verses around the ark, why would somebody put it here? That's going to be our 30,000 foot analysis. So they take to complaining. A fire breaks out. Notice at the edges of the camp. We don't know what the complaining is. God is angry, though. The people cry out.
Is it a reflex to craving?
No, we're not there yet.
Okay.
That's coming, though. Good memory. Richard remembers other years here. But we don't have it yet. So the people cry out to Moshe, of course, right? So they're scared. They cry out to Moshe, and Moshe prays to God, and the fire dies down. The place was named Teveira because Ba'ara, right, broke out in flames, a fire that God broke out against them. Now, Ha'asaf Suf, we've had this conversation before. We're not going to spend a lot of time here. The Asaf Suf, remember we've talked about this, the riffraff, that it's onomatopoeia? Asaf Suf, the riffraff, Asher Bekirbo, that was in its midst, the people's midst. This is where you are going. Hitavu ta'ava, craved a craving, right? And great that you remember that we talked about. Zorenberg translates this as their sin is what they were craving was a craving because they had everything they needed. They crave a craving. And this is their great sin, is that God takes care of everything they need with manna, with Miriam's well. They have shelter, they have sustenance, and it's not enough. They want to crave. They're hungry for hunger, right? So we can either read that, well, of course, it's human nature to want something and to yearn for, and then you get to satisfy it. If you're never hungry, you don't get the reward of satiety. So we could read it generously. The text here does not.
You need to be needy.
They want to be needy. And God is like, the chutzpah of these people, I take care of everything for them, and they want to not have the sense of everything right? Okay, so that's one interpretation. And they express it as, basar, who will feed me meat? We remember the fish that we used to eat for free in Egypt. The cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. Now our gullets are shriveled. There is nothing at all. Nothing except this manna to eat. Right? Poor things. All right.
Shriveled gullets.
Right. Shriveled gullets. Okay. So Moses hears the people bocheh, weeping, right? Every family, they're weeping. And God was very angry, and Moshe was distressed. And Moshe says to God, Moshe goes to God now. Why have you dealt ill with your servant? And why have I not enjoyed your favor? That you've laid the burden of all this people on me. Did I produce these people? Right? Did I birth them? That you should say to me, carry them in your bosom as a caregiver carries an infant to the land that you promised on oath to their fathers. And by the way, the caregiver is the one who nurses. It's the wet nurse. This is not just any caregiver. Did I birth this people that you should give them to me and say, carry them as a wet nurse carries an infant to the land that you promised them? So Moshe's quoting God. Notice that you should say to me, carry them in your bosom as a wet nurse does an infant. Where does God say this? We don't know. But Moshe is suggesting God has said this to Moshe. Carry them, this, people, as a wet nurse carries an infant to the land that I've given that I swore to their ancestors. All right. Not a terrible image, right? That's not a terrible image.
I've sort of heard the reverse of these people. I've done this and I've done that, and look at them now. There's been anger expressed by God about how these people react.
Yes, but we're talking about Moshe. Moshe's using a metaphor here that's not a bad metaphor. I'm carrying them as a nursemaid carries the infant, or the mother carries. That is a loving, sheltering. All right, we're gonna read more about it. All right, so that seems like, but now Moshe's like, what's happened to, this infant has become a screaming toddler with teeth. How do we feel about nursing toddlers with teeth? Yeah. Anybody who has nursed a child in this room just went, oh my God, right? You are placing what is most vulnerable about you as a person into the mouth of a being with no frontal lobes and teeth. That, right?
Ouch.
Yeah, and you don't forget it quickly, right? Okay. Where am I to get meat to give all this people when they whine before me and say, give us meat to eat? I cannot carry this people by myself. It's too much for me. If you would deal with me thus, kill me rather, I beg you, and let me see no more of my wretchedness. Moshe's falling apart here. All right. So what is going on? That Moshe is absolutely falling apart because the people are complaining about meat. We've got fire at the edges. We've got the Asaf Suf starting to agitate about meat. But notice by the end, it's who's weeping? It starts with the Asaf Suf, but who's weeping when Moshe gets completely undone, unhinged, right?
Moses.
Everybody, every family is crying now about meat. So it starts at the Asaf Suf. It starts at the margins, but then what happens? That becomes contagious and it reaches every family. And now what do you have? Not just folks at the edges being upset and getting all agitated. You have what I'm seeing in all of these articles that I'm reading. You have a mobocracy. It has spread to everybody. And now everybody is, I was going to say on fire. Like everybody is agitated. Everybody's upset. Everybody is angry. And everybody turns on. They turn on the establishment. They turn on the establishment. They turn on Moshe. They turn against God.
Getting
right?
that.
Getting it? All right. So this is our text. Then, all right. So let's go to some sources on this. So first, let's look at our inverted nuns. So here is how it appears in the Torah. One version of how it appears in Torah. Again, you don't have to read Hebrew to see. See this inverted thing right here? The nun is not usually written this way. It's written this way, right? It's written this way. But here it's backwards. Here's the other one, right? So it starts at Vayehi bin Soa Ha'aron, right? And then it ends at when the ark returns. That's the normative tradition. I've told you about an alternate tradition. Okay. And so some say there's a tradition that this is a book in its own right. As we just said, let's look at Talmud, Shabbat 115b. Apropos the portion, Vayehi bin Soa Ha'aron, when the ark traveled, the Gemara cites, meaning the Midrash, cites that which it is stated. And when the ark traveled and Moses proclaimed, rise up, O God, your enemies will scatter and those who hate you will flee from before you. And the Holy One, blessed be God, made signs in the Torah for this portion above and below, meaning before and after it, in order to say that this is not its place, as the previous portion does not discuss the nation's travels. Rabbi, so meaning this thing is not where it belongs. It belongs when we're talking about the people traveling. But I don't, whatever, that's one tradition, according to Talmud. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi says, it is not for that reason that the signs were inserted. Rather, the signs are there because this portion is considered a book unto itself. The Gemara asks, according to whose opinion is that which Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman said, that Rabbi Yonatan said, that with regard to the verse, with wisdom she built her house, she carved its 7 pillars. Remember, when you're looking for proof for your argument, you have to go to another verse of Torah. And it can be anywhere. It can be anywhere in Tanakh. It doesn't have to be just in the 5 books. You want proof for your for your argument? Go look for another verse of Torah. So the other verse of Torah is Proverbs 9. With wisdom she built her house. She carved its 7 pillars. These are the 7 books of Torah. Well, there aren't 7 books of Torah, are there? How many books of Torah are there? 5. But if you're using Proverbs 9, obviously there are 7, because with wisdom she built 7 pillars, and the 7 pillars must be circular reasoning that Betsy's very familiar with in her life, right? You have to accept a certain premise before you can say, well, here's the proof, right? So these are the 7 books of Torah, according to whose opinion? According to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. As by his count, there are 7 books of Torah: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, until when the ark traveled, the portion and when the ark traveled, which is considered its own book, and the remainder of Numbers and Deuteronomy. Okay? Those are your 7 books of Torah. So as early as the Talmud, we have a tradition that the beginning of the book of Numbers is a different book than the rest of the book of Numbers and Deuteronomy. That's already in the Talmud, right? So, okay, why do I care? Okay, wait, I have to just give you this one thing here because I just thought it was lovely. Where are my nuns? Okay, here's go to text 8. Rabbi Menachem Mendel Kasher observed a variety of different shapes for these inverted nuns, which he illustrated in his work Torah Shlema. All right, here are examples that Menachem Mendel Kasher observed of the ways scribes render the inverted nuns. So you see, there's lots of ways to do it. The calligrapher, whoever's calligraphing the Torah, whoever's scribing the Torah, has their way that they were taught to do these nuns. Rabbi Solomon Luria observed no fewer than 12 different arrangements of the inverted nun pair. And there are many more in extant Torah manuscripts which escaped his observations, because you had to actually, once upon a time, look at the Torah scroll to know what they looked like. There was no microfiche. There was no internet, right? So how many Torah scrolls could one person observe in their lifetime? I mean, how far were you going to travel for this project to look at all these scrolls to see what is the tradition of the nuns? All right, why did I bring this to you? Because I want to show you one tradition. It took me forever to figure out what the Midrash was friggin' talking about. But look at number 20, this nun. There is a tradition of only turning the head of the nun, the top of the nun, leaving the bottom of the nun facing the normal direction. All right, so nun in example number 20, text number 8. You see? Yeah. Okay. So it took me forever. Like once I found this, I was like, oh, okay, now this makes sense to me, because I found this beautiful midrash that says it's from Zohar. It's from the Zohar, an early book of Jewish mysticism, one of our earliest books of Kabbalah. And with this, the ark would set travel. Moshe would say, rise up, Adonai. It means do not forsake us and turn your face towards us. Then the nun turned its front backwards to us like this, like the one who turns his face to someone who loves him. And that when the ark began to rest, the Shekhinah turned back her face from Israel and turned her face towards the ark. So this is this lovely midrash that says, and there's another one, that remember the ark is traveling 3 days out, right? So the Shekhinah is traveling 3 days in front of them. The Shekhinah, symbolized by the Nun, would not separate herself from it and would travel with it, meaning with the ark. And because of her love for Israel, the Nun turns its face and turns back, right? Like the young deer that keeps turning her face back to the place that she left when she goes forth. Therefore, when the ark set forth, the Nun turned her face towards the children of Israel and the shoulders of her body towards the ark. So this beautiful image of the Shekhinah not wanting to take her attention off the ark or separate from the ark, but longing for Bnei Israel that are getting further and further behind. And so the Nun is the Shekhinah who turns her face out of love and out of the beloved longing, or the deer longing for home, turns to look at Bnei Israel. So a beautiful.
I also think of like the statue. I think it's Lot's wife.
Yeah.
Looking forward, and her body's very clear, turning back to look, and she turns. I'm just saying, she turns the stone that way.
So what's funny is, either you've seen that rendered somewhere, because in the Torah it just says she turned to look. It could have been her whole body. But there's obviously artistic traditions that you've taken in that say she was faced this way and only her head is turned back, right? Which I think of, Caravaggio. I think of like how the romantic masters would have had her turned like this and turned into a pillar of salt just like this, right? All right. So
these various versions appear. They're
different scrolls.
Torah scroll.
Yes. So the same place, but different scribes write it differently from their teachers who taught them, right? So when I saw this, but I had to see that to figure out what that midrash was about. Like, because if the whole Nun is turned around, the midrash doesn't make any sense. But then when I saw these, and I'm like, oh, there's one where just the top is turned, then that makes complete sense to me, right? That whoever wrote that midrash was used to that scribal tradition. All right. Anyway,
One here that's contemporary, that like in the most recent Torahs that were scribed.
They don't tell me that. It doesn't tell me that. Okay. So here we see that in a Torah scroll that is 700 years old, right? Where is the Nun placed? Like I told you, it's placed in the middle of that word, complainers. Why? Now go back to what we just said about there being traditions, that there are 2 books of Numbers divided by this parsha. One tradition puts that second Nun that divides the book of Numbers from the first one to the second one, if we accept that interpretation, puts it in the middle of the word complainers. Because
Well, a thought that occurred to me was, if you look at the 2 nuns that are in the word itself, if you stick something in between them, you sort of created this pivot for a balancing point. And sort of the world is now, or people are hinged on balancing, going between a world in which they have everything they need and one into which they've slid into complaining. And there's always this struggle of maintaining some sort of balance.
Beautiful. That the Nun between mitonanim is because the pivot point, as Richard just beautifully said it, is about the complaining, right? It's about their attitude. It's about their worldview. It's about the choice to accept what they've been given as a gift and to be grateful and to turn to the representatives of that authority, and to say, thank you that we got the law. Thank you that we got the manna. Thank you that we're about to inherit a land. And we just got Moshe with all this good, right to this pivot point. And the pivoting happens right in the middle of they become complainers. That is the interpretation, that we are always at that hinge point, but that for us in our story, this is when it happens. It happens when their worldview changes.
Just to continue, if when you were commenting on how we see how what starts with the riffraff proceeds to all of society, imagine like sprinkling just a little bit of sand onto the side that's going towards complaining. The tipping is going to start off very slowly, but then it's going to accelerate.
This is a theory, exactly what Richard just said, in one of the articles I'm reading that I didn't bring you. And I mean, I did bring you, I brought you something from the article, but she says somewhere else in the article, it takes about 20 years for a new generation to be completely influenced, impacted, and then become adults who espouse a certain worldview. And that it starts slowly, subverting a culture starts slowly. And then to Richard's point, it starts to accelerate. And that is what we are seeing right now. There's a process that has been underway to undermine democracy. And it's started slowly, and then it starts to, and with the help of social media, purposeful disinformation, and what it starts to pick up speed. And we are now at a hinge point. So, actually, the Cold War, that undermining democracy became an imperative for the USSR and for China, and that China is now in the place that the USSR used to be in. If you talk to, and I'm getting all my articles mixed up, but in one of the articles they talk about when you talk to spies who used to work for the USSR in the United States, undermining is cheaper. It's a little slower, but it's cheaper than full-on aggression. And it's often way more effective. And that they were playing the long game, and that now we see it with China and other totalitarian regimes, including politicized Islam, in the form of Iran. Look at what Iran is able to do, right, in its proxy wars, right, and the propaganda that it has successfully, right, put into Europe, into all of these places, that is what we are seeing, and that it has taken about 20 to 25 years, and that is what we're seeing on college campuses.
Have to overlay the technology.
Correct.
And when I went to college to become a teacher, they said to me, and it was UCLA, very theoretical, they said to me, it takes 20 years for the research we're teaching you to get into the classroom. And I said, how dumb is that? So now we see that there is stuff being taught for a while now in the classroom, and just ways of seeing things, including America's bad. White people are by definition, right, all racist. We're sitting on native land, and anything that happens successfully in our economy is because we are greedy, habitually consuming capitalists. And I'm not saying there's not a lot of that that's true. The challenge is this starts to undermine trust in the institutions that are representative of that country. So you don't hear a lot good said, right? You hear that Jefferson owned slaves, but not that he also paved the way through his philosophy and the teaching of that philosophy and the laws created around it and the documents like the Constitution created around it that paved the way for emancipation. That's not taught anymore. So the cynicism for our institutions, so I'm just, hang on. So there is a point, and we've been in counterpoints that needed to be corrected for, right? So, but that we're at a point that we have to take seriously the threats to our relationship to those institutions that preserve democracy, not that we shouldn't be critical and passionate about reforming them. There's a difference between that and what we see that makes Moshe understand that he's in big trouble and foreshadows that this is not the generation that's going to be able to build and maintain and preserve the institutions that are going to provide for the kind of society that is the vision of the first part of the book of Numbers. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
They're not receiving some extremely left going to undermine everything education. I mean, especially depending on where you're at in the country, people are receiving the opposite, an extraordinarily regressive education, what we're seeing coming out.
Right.
Yeah, I also have to say, I think that the liberalism that we're seeing on the far left, I see, and that's happening in certain spaces, but somebody who spent time on the far left, it's not all of them. It's not every organization or every chapter of organization or every person who's part of it, or even every protester or every protest. There's it's a wide swath of things happening, and there are like productive conversations going on, and people within those, it's the loudest, angriest, worst voices that are getting amplified on social media and in the press. And we see that, although that's the same thing happening. And you also, I feel like I'm seeing also a lot of liberalism coming out of, I don't know what you want to call it, the center left, even. Like, I feel like there's a lot of rhetoric that has come out since October 7th that's either like, a lot of, it reminds me of Bush era, you're either with us or against us, you're pro-Israel or you're anti-Israel, you're pro-Palestine, or you're anti-Palestine, that is coming out. And like, if we want to be able to like really take a hard look at what's happening to everything, we also have to be like looking at what's happening in our own communities and the things that are against us. I mean, like the ADL or APAC now just like seemingly having it out for anybody who says anything critical. It's like there's no room for nuance. And it's not just, like I said, on the far left coming out of institutions that, and Hartman is a great example of like a place that's doing it right. There's a lot of pluralistic thought coming out of it. There's a lot of conversations. I pay attention but you see like I just want to, I don't know, I don't want to like equivocate or both sides it, but you also see on social media there's a lot of denial about like, coming out of people of what's happening to Palestinians and the things that they're experiencing, as well as denial about some horrific denial about October 7th. It's an echo chamber for everybody, and it's amplifying. And I just think that we got to recognize too what's happening within our own houses that's making us, polarized.
100%.
Can we hold nuance? Can we hold points of view? Can we hold conversations with people who might be, pro or anti in a way that makes us uncomfortable? Like
So all of this is super important. What Nick is bringing up is super important.
I want to say that's my end of that.
It is super important. So I would like to bracket that and put it at the end of our conversation, right? Like I think it's important about everything we're going to say. All I'll say in response is I'm not confused about what's happening on the right. I'm troubled. I'm not confused. Where I start reading and digging in is where I'm confused, right? It's like I don't understand, like what has happened to the places that I used to feel comfortable and at home. When I'm told as a cisgendered female, a lesbian really doesn't have much to say. She's not even really queer. This has been said to my face. So I'm not really queer because I'm a cisgendered female who sleeps with other cisgendered females. So what do you really have to say about queerness? That's the stuff that's confusing to me and has me reading. Do you know what I mean? Because it's like, what is happening, right, in the places that I don't understand. So, and I totally understand what's happening with the ADL and APAC. That makes total sense to me. Why they'd be in denial. I'm not saying it's right, but it's the places that I don't understand, right? It's the kids who don't have any clue what's happening, who are so drawn, right, to this free Palestine, but don't give a crap about Ukraine. It's the places I'm confused about why it's so attractive and why they're so on fire, and that's where I lean in. So I'm not trying to focus on that as the biggest problem. And if I gave that impression, I misspoke, and I'm sorry. I'm talking about where I'm finding a need to kind of dig into the dangers to the establishment that I'm seeing on the left. And it's not everybody on the left, but I'm still wrestling with, wait a minute, like the way to counter the things that about democracy that aren't working are to lean into democracy and into democratic institutions. And we need those people fighting for the reformation of our democratic institutions. And when I see things that are being said that seem anti that on the left, then I get really scared and I get really confused. And so that's the only reason I'm bringing forward that in terms of that's what's hitting. That's what's right. That's where I'm like, wait, there's a disconnect for me that I don't, the rest of it I understand. The defensiveness of this one, the defensiveness of that one, right? Everybody turns a blind eye and we're all in echo chambers like that. I understand. This is the place I just am still really wrestling. And so that's why I'm digging in and bringing it forward. Okay, Betsy, then Lisa.
Similar to your struggle with that issue, I'm struggling with the
feminist perspective, because I'm saying, well, where are these voices about the captives, the hostages who are being raped, and what Hamas did on October 7th to women? And I mean, it's horrendous, and everybody's silent about that. I feel for the Palestinians, and this war has to stop. But I mean, that's one place where I just don't understand.
Right. And Sheryl Sandberg, I saw an interview with Sheryl Sandberg, who made the movie about, whatever, I forget what the title is, Screams of Silence or something, about the sexual torture, rape and murder done to women during October 7th. And this was one of the things addressed is like, where's the outcry of, the feminist world about that, about using, sexual torture and murder, during sexual torture as an act of war. Where's the outrage? Yes, be outraged about all of it that you're outraged about, but why is there nothing being expressed from feminists?
There wasn't
Denial.
just thinking that everything goes so fast that everything's forgotten.
But some things are not dropped. Some things are still, it's like, it's still, right? It's like,
The movie is called Silence After Screams.
That are being killed in Gaza.
So we're just saying all of it deserves our attention. Some of us are confused and upset about why certain places we have felt at home and have felt aligned with, like the feminist leadership, we feel betrayed and we feel they have ignored their own stated values. Why? You don't have to not be outraged about the Palestinians who are suffering. I'm not asking anybody to turn a blind eye to any suffering. Why is the sexual violence of October 7th not addressed? Nobody wants to address it. And that, for me, is a failure of feminist leadership. And for me, the meta 30,000-foot question is why? Why in this instance? Why? Right? And so, anyway, this is what I'm reading about. Lisa?
Well, as a child of the left for several generations, I have to say that at some point I came to the conclusion that there are as many autocratic impulses on the left as there are on the right. We can't ignore that. And my poor grandfather, the communist, who finally had to say no to Russia, because of their attitude towards Israel. When those two had to face each other, he went with Israel. I mean, that was the point. And this thinking it's something in the human psyche that we want to just have one way, and we want to go that way because it makes it easier. And that's as much right. And that's what we have to guard against, because the hardest thing of all is to be nuanced. The hardest thing of all is to maintain a democracy,
which is about plurality. Which is just to your point. Democracy is about plurality,
which is hard.
Which is really hard, which is why it's so dangerous, because democracies are hard.
Yeah. And it's hard in the same way that God chose Abraham, because Abraham welcomes strangers, which is also really hard. And migration and all of this, which is exciting people all over the world too. Yuri is part of this also. The otherness coming into your place, and that excites interest in the right.
Right. Right. And I will own that, and that's what I'm trying to say is that yes, it's on the left as well, and not everywhere on the left, but some of us have been in denial that it could happen on the left. Right. Even though we know about fascism, even though we'd moved past that. The world saw after World War II, but now look at Holocaust denialism. Yeah. It's rampant. So it's like what I was so naively thought, well, the world has learned that. So now the left won't be drawn to that. They're going to support liberal democracies. Look at Europe. And now we're seeing the absolute danger, right, of that same impulse on the left.
October 7th denialism.
Yeah, yes, right, for sure. So did somebody at home had their hand raised that I skipped over?
It was me.
Robin.
It was me.
Okay, Robin.
I don't exactly know how to say this, but I was a curriculum developer in 1979. We had a new social studies framework that all the teachers all over the country were using. And I traveled and I taught them how to do it. And since those days in 1979, 35 years ago, things have changed. And I sent you 1 million articles a long time ago. And I've been educating myself 1 million for all those days. And it's a change in the faculties at the universities. They're left on the left. When I went to UCLA and studied history, we were taught both sides of every question, of every part of history. Some people thought this, some people thought that. And then we tried to make sense of it ourselves. But what's going on at the universities now is it's being taught. American history is being taught negatively. All the bad things we've done, slavery, taking the land of the indigenous people, we're colonialists, we're blah, 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 blah. All that stuff has been taught to these kids. That's why you're faced with all of this now. That's why the kids are screaming intifada, global intifada. Okay, there's a war on the West. Douglas Murray wrote a book on it. There's a whole book about it. That these people, the Chinese and the Iranians, proxies, they have a war against us now, and they're winning.
And it's not new.
Going on.
And we've had our head in the sand because we
right.
thought we
But
were invulnerable.
Not me.
We thought we were smartest. We thought we had the solution, and we thought for sure everyone will get that, and everyone will live into it, and the world will see it. And I was one of them.
Yeah, you were.
I just want to do a little more of the text because I just think I know we're over time, but Bert will fix it. Because I think this is important, right? At the beginning of our parsha, we find a ripe nation with a carefully developed social structure, seemingly ready to play its role in the unfolding of Jewish destiny. Text number, 11. Text number 11. Final marching instructions are issued and the campaign begins. We saw that. We read that. The Torah describes in detail the impressive coordination of the entire machaneh. The camp begins to march in perfect harmony, right? The tribes, guided by their leaders, unite to march together under predetermined banners. Each banner, consisting of 3 tribes, assumes its rightful position. The dismantling and reconstruction of the Mishkan is attended to by the Levites, who blend in and join the march as the entire nation, led by the Almighty, begins its dramatic journey through the wilderness on the way to the Promised Land. Until this point, everything has proceeded according to schedule. All the instructions preparing Bnei Israel for their momentous campaign were fulfilled with precision. Everything is ready to begin the march. The excitement and tension reach a crescendo as the journey, this thing does not like the way my phone translates this stuff. Okay. Journey towards the fulfillment of Jewish destiny begins. The inheritance of Eretz Yisrael and the redemption of the Jewish people seem almost inevitable. You see here, I just keep thinking how I grew up thinking about democracy, right? And the checks and balances of a democratic system. There is a sense of excitement and urgency as the first book of Numbers abruptly ends. If we accept this 2 book of Numbers theory. Following the parsha of Vayhi bin Soa, right, that little chunk, we witness a dramatic shift as the machaneh begins to malfunction. The people took to complaining bitterly before God. God heard and was incensed. A fire of God broke out against them, ravaging the outskirts of the camp. Some commentators explain that this refers to the failure of the fringe groups among the general population. It begins at the fringes. Quote, ravaging the outskirts of the camp. This refers to the foreigners who were located at the fringes of the camp, right? That's one interpretation from Yalkut Shimoni. However, others understand that it includes error of the leadership as well. Ravaging the outskirts, kitzei, of the camp. This refers to the kitzinim among them, the great ones among them, a play on words by our commentator, right? That there's a failure of leadership. The episode is followed by a more serious event. The riffraff says, who will feed us meat? Thus, following the parsha of Vayhi bin Soa, there's a steady decline. The institutions that have been established begin to malfunction. The communal fabric that had been woven together so carefully starts unraveling. Moreover, the entire mood of the people has changed. After the initial 3-day journey, the children of Israel are a mere 8-day march from the Promised Land. Then their request for meat results in a month's delay, right? So and then we get a quote. Miriam and Aaron challenge Moshe's leadership, right? So a challenge to Moshe's leadership happens. That's a 7-day delay as Miriam, right, is punished with leprosy, right? The tension and excitement has been replaced as Bnei Israel camp in the wilderness of Paran 40 days, and the dramatic events which will change the course of Jewish history, the report of the spies, and the people's rejection of the land of Israel. Because then what happens? What happens with the spies? It is determined that this generation will die in the desert. Now what's 8 days away is 40 years away. The shift from the initial journey of the harmonious machaneh and eventual tensions. In other words, the section preceding Vayehi Binsoa is not the first stage of Numbers, but the first version. The first version of Numbers. It describes the ideal machaneh in their triumphant march towards the realization of Jewish destiny. The section following Vayehi Binsoa records a separate version, the failed attempt at implementation. The two sections describe two separate stories, and therefore, according to Rebbe, they are independent books. This is what landed for me. The vision and the excitement around that vision of what democracy could bring to the world, and then things that start at the fringes and spread all the way through, makes it a failed implementation, as sometimes failure of leadership, sometimes the mistrust and undermining of the institutions that have been at the center, and that sense that we're all working, together towards something. We don't have to agree, but we have to agree on the project. We have to agree on the destiny. We have to agree on the mission. If we don't, we die in the desert and we do not reach the land of Israel. Now in Deuteronomy, here's what you gotta do to stay, to earn it. But now with this stuff, it's like we are taking this is a giant step back to before Deuteronomy. There's a huge failure before Deuteronomy. And it's right here at the book of Numbers where it separates the first version, which is everything works the way the system was designed. And there are changes made in there. God makes changes, right? 70 elders, right? Yitro makes some suggestions about a court system. So things get changed. It's not that it has to be static, but the basic overall vision, destiny, and the way we get there is the first version. Right here is where we see the second, the reality and the failed implementation of that system, which means they do not reach the promised land. I gave you an excerpt from this article from Ayan Hersey. Her article, We Have Been Subverted. She's born in Somalia in 1969, and so was raised in a country where she saw what Iran and the USSR were able to affect in Somalia, right? So when she's talking about subversion, so this, if you think about what we were just talking about, subversion refers, text 13, to a process by which the values and principles of an established system are contradicted or reversed in an attempt to sabotage the existing social order and its structures of power, authority, tradition, hierarchy, and social norms. It involves a systematic attempt to overthrow or undermine a government or political system, often carried out by persons working secretly from within. Subversion is used as a tool to achieve political goals because it generally carries less risk, cost, and difficulty as opposed to open belligerency. The act of subversion can lead to the destruction or damage of an established system or government. In the context of ideological subversion, subversion aims to gradually change the perception and values of a society, ultimately leading to the undermining of its existing systems and beliefs. Just because you're paranoid does not mean they are not out to get you. And I feel like caution is important. I'm not suggesting this is all of reality. I'm saying the book of Numbers and the analysis done by this person in Torah Me'etzion lines up for me with this notion of a hinge point. And I feel so now the work is what counteracts that? What works against subversion, whether it's by people homegrown or influences from outside that then get in, what we see happening right now that I've been identifying for the last hour and 15 minutes. We're at a hinge point, whether it's on the right or the left, both of them at their, most extremes are wanting the same thing, which is totalitarianism, authoritarianism, to fix it and to have one answer. And that hinge point, if we can really articulate it and identify it, then the question becomes, so what do we do? about it. Yeah. What do we do? So there was another article that talked about this whole idea of meat and flesh. And then we keep seeing another word that is from what God is doing is taking from the 70 elders and putting the spirit of Moshe on them. And the second article after the first article that I read in here says that's the solution. We have to address the spirit of the vision. We have to reinvigorate, re-energize the passion around the original understanding of destiny, of what our destiny is, of what democracy is, of what it stands for, that it tolerates and celebrates nuance and how hard that is. And so we have to make sure, as Nick said, so that's why I wanted to bracket it and put it over here, the way this part of Torah brackets is like, I want to put it at the end and say, so therefore we have to do the hard work starting at home, starting in our own homes. I got a 20-year-old. There's a lot of work to do to tolerate the nuance in my own house. We have to start at home, and then we have to do it here. And we have to figure out as a community how to celebrate the difficulty of holding nuance and a plurality of views. Yes, it's hard, but democracy is hard. So let's celebrate that it's hard because it's ultimate. It's ultimately good. And so if it's ultimately good, what that ultimately is good is not hard. Truly. If it's really healthy and really good, it's not going to be hard.
It doesn't make any difference if it's hard.
So we have to do exactly what Nick said. Lean into, doesn't matter that it's hard. We can celebrate that it's hard because it's ultimately so productive and fruitful. Anything that is hard. And so let's commit to the vision again and the institutions and their health and all of the reforming that has to be done to them to make them more healthy. And that means holding on to very difficult commitments to conversation across very painful lines. But that is one of the things I think we are designed to do, because this ain't new for us. This is not new for us. And what I just said, I feel, which one? Israel, people Israel, which one are we going to be? Jewish Americans, which version is it going to be? A lot of it is up to us. Shabbat Shalom.
You've been listening to Rabbi Amy Bernstein's Friday morning Torah study from Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades, California. For more information, go to our website, www.ourki.org.